Well, it started with a note, just a name and a phone number. Harmless, maybe. But for one woman in Coppell, Pennsylvania, that note was the beginning of a nightmare. Then came the second note, and this time it wasn't an invitation. It was a threat, a grotesque fantasy of dismemberment, cannibalism, and a promise that she was being watched. And then the final message: I've killed 20 women, and you're next. Let's look into this budding serial killer's actions in Pennsylvania. Hey, welcome to Profiling Evil. I hope you'll take a moment, hit the like and subscribe button, and ring the bell so that you're getting all of our communications as we send them out. By doing so, you're going to be first in line for new videos, and I hope you'll give us a thumbs up. That really does help us with the algorithm. And please share Profiling Evil with your friends. Now let's break down this case a little bit. It started with a nobody, a guy named Dylan Bish, who police say masqueraded as a serial killer, threatening extreme violence against a woman who lived near him. Now, if true, it appears that his goal was to assert control, instill terror, and manipulate his target. Dylan Bish is a 19-year-old forensic student at a nearby university. And while this guy didn't physically harm his victim, and this is all alleged, his explicit threats of dismemberment and cannibalism indicate a disturbing psychological profile that warrants examination. Now, were these the ramblings of a pathetic nobody, or the inklings of what the future held if this alleged predator remained on the loose? Let's catch this news story.
Beaver County say they may have stopped the, quote, spawning of a potential serial killer. You are looking at 19-year-old Dylan Bish. Channel 11's Rich Pierce reports on the disturbing notes. Police say that Bish admitted to leaving on his neighbor's porch.
He literally lives 3 houses down from me. I mean, that's scary.
He is this man, 19-year-old Dylan Bish. According to Coppell Borough Police, Bish left a note on a female neighbor's front porch in February saying, quote, "You're mine forever." The note also described things Bish wanted to do to her, including dismemberment and acts of cannibalism.
You only really see this stuff in, like Law and Order and stuff like that.
Bish denied writing that note, but things continued to escalate. According to police, Bish also sent a text message containing graphic video of a person being skinned alive, with descriptions of how he wanted to kill and eat the victim. Bish was arrested Thursday and charged with stalking, harassment, and making terroristic threats. The news coming as a shock to neighbors on 3rd Avenue, just a block from Coppell's police department.
I don't even think I've processed it yet because, I've seen him around quite a bit.
They say the 19-year-old mostly kept to himself and they weren't aware of any previous issues. Police also say Bish had been studying forensic science at Salem University in West Virginia so that he knew how to, quote, never get caught.
It's somebody that literally I can throw a ball and it land on his front porch. My daughter lives here. That's alarming.
We went to Bish's home this evening and knocked on the door. There were people inside, but no one answered. He's being held in the Beaver County Jail on $1 million bond and will undergo a mental evaluation.
That's sick. I hope he gets the help he needs because he really does need it.
Rich Pierce, Channel 11 News.
Now, you can read more about this case by searching on the web. But what I want to do in this particular video is concentrate on the behaviors and the psychology behind predators who feign to be serial killers. Now, I'm using the case of Dylan Bish to highlight some of these tendencies, but I want to be really clear that right now, Dylan Bish is presumed innocent of all the charges that he's facing. So in what appears to be a pretty compelling case, that all could change in the future, but I want to just start by examining a couple of things. And first, the desire for power and control. At the core of individuals who feign to be serial killers is a deep-seated need for power and dominance. These offenders often experience social rejection, isolation, or perceived inadequacies, leading them to seek control over other people, and often in the most terrifying manner possible. By making threats of extreme violence, they exert psychological dominance over their victims, often achieving a sense of empowerment, this empowerment that they lack in other aspects of their lives. And it's interesting as you look at this image of him to kind of imagine what this person's life is about. Again, he's a 19-year-old and he's a kid going to college for forensics. So in the criminal justice field. And many indicated in the media reports that I read that they believed this was so that he could understand what he was up against if he were to commit crimes. Kind of makes you think of similarities to the Brian Koberger case. Now, Bish's case illustrates this point. His alleged fixation on his neighbor and his refusal to cease his obsession until she was, quote, dead, underscores his need for power and control. The handwritten notes and messages that I've heard about and read information on online detail acts of brutal violence where tools of psychological warfare were meant to induce paralyzing fear. There is clearly, number two, a fantasy and escalation going on right here. For some offenders, this line between fantasy and reality is dangerously blurred. They construct these elaborate mental scenarios where the acts that they put out as the ultimate predator somehow gives them gratification from the horror that they're instilling. Some use these threats as a form of rehearsal, kind of testing their ability to intimidate before potentially escalating to physical violence. And if you go back to some of my earlier videos on this process of fantasy, think about the fact that this is a place where they can test drive their ideas. They can think about it. But pretty soon, fantasy isn't enough, and it has to evolve into reality where they act it out. And that's what's really frightening about this case, and what suggests that police got ahead of this and stopped this guy. The question is whether the courts will follow through if, in fact, he is a predator like this. And by following through, if they'll get him the kind of mental health counseling that could change this course that he's on. Bish's case shows evidence of this fantasy-driven obsession. A desire to study forensic science again is a way to maybe evade capture, and it suggests an escalating pattern of thought that could have materialized into real violence had this guy not been apprehended. And number three, it also talks about this idea of sadistic gratification and narcissism, because many of these offenders exhibit sadistic tendencies, deriving pleasure from the suffering of others. In other words, he was getting his kicks by having this person go through this horrible experience of receiving these communications. Additionally, narcissistic traits are often present as they view themselves as superior intellects capable of manipulating both their victims and law enforcement. And it almost appears that there was a little toying with law enforcement going on. Now, Bish's admissions, if it's all true, that he hoped to control his victim through fear and intimidation, is a classic example of this sadistic kind of gratification. His belief that he could outmaneuver law enforcement by understanding forensic sciences further underscores this grandiose self-perception that he had. But let me just be really clear about this. I don't care who you are. If you received communications like the victim in this case received, you're going to be physically, emotionally, visibly shaken by this thing. Victims of these psychological predators suffer immense emotional distress. Even without the physical harm that's being threatened, the psychological toll can be as severe as experiencing an actual attack. You see, it's not uncommon for victims who receive digital, written, or verbal threats to experience a number of things like chronic anxiety or hypervigilance. They can actually have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, just like a soldier can, but in a different way. They might experience paranoia and social withdrawal, and they certainly may feel some issues of trust and a disrupted sense of safety. In Bishop's case, his victim endured months of fear, beginning with that initial note and culminating with the explicit death threats she received. The psychological damage inflicted by such predatory behavior is profound and lasting. But it appears this woman did all the right things. She immediately contacted law enforcement, who began trying to piece this thing together. But cases like Dylan Bish's investigation take time. It is really difficult. And there are a number of reasons why that I thought might be kind of interesting to talk about. Again, primarily due to the nature of stalking, the legal thresholds for criminal charges, and the complexity of digital and forensic examinations really make these things difficult. So let's break down why law enforcement sometimes takes so dang long in investigating these kinds of cases. You see, when the police investigate cases that involve stalking or threats, potential serial offender behavior like this, it may seem to the public, to all of us, that they're taking an incredibly long time to get it done. But in reality, cases like these require extensive evidence collection, really big time legal considerations. And in this case, as it's shown, interagency coordination to ensure that dangerous individuals are not only arrested, but successfully prosecuted. And then it's up to corrections to get them the mental health counseling that they need to have. The Dylan Bish case in Coppell, Pennsylvania, is a prime example of why these investigations take so dang long. So, number one, let's think about a couple of things. Stalking cases often start as minor incidents. Now, this didn't seem to appear to start, but I would suspect if this is, in fact, the predator, we're going to find that his stalking started out in more minor kinds of incidents, maybe peeping Tom and other kinds of things. Most predators don't start out with overt threats. Instead, they kind of test the boundaries. And this is really important to think about if you are a potential victim in these kinds of cases. Back in this case, in November of 2024, Bish, or at least this predator, left the first note. It was nothing more than an attempt to initiate some kind of contact. Now, from a law enforcement perspective, this alone is not a crime. It's just an unwanted message. And police deal with countless cases of unwanted attention, but without some kind of an explicit threat or an act of violence, there's no legal basis to intervene. But this is where it's so important that if you happen to know who the person is that's making contact, to draw the line, to say absolutely not, to tell them to back off. It's important to take a strong stance immediately, because as these offenders are testing the boundaries, they also want to see how far they can get along with you. Stalking cases often escalate slowly as the offenders continue to kind of push the limit of what they can get away with. Unfortunately, it takes repeated offenses before law enforcement can actually prove a pattern that meets the threshold of stalking, or in this case, terroristic threats. Now, number two, there's a need for evidence collection in these kinds of cases. And in this particular case, by February of 2025, the case had escalated significantly, because that's when Bish reportedly left a second note explicitly detailing fantasies of dismemberment and necrophilia. At this point, the police had clear indications of dangerous intent, but they still needed to prove who was writing these notes. So then the forensic evidence starts kicking in. They have to do handwriting analysis, fingerprints possibly, potential DNA. It all takes time to process. And then law enforcement, in this particular case, had to send off the note to the Pennsylvania State Crime Lab, where it joined a backlog of other cases awaiting forensic testing. Now, the delay wasn't due to negligence, but more the reality of how long forensic analysis takes. Additionally, again, think about this. Police had to determine if Bish was genuinely dangerous or just seeking attention. Now, it doesn't matter to you if you're the victim in these cases, but many people make disturbing statements they never act on. The investigators had to assess whether the threats were credible before they could take legal action. And then you got to take into account the digital trail, and it takes time to unravel these trails. One of the biggest obstacles in cases like this is identifying who the perpetrator is behind the anonymous threats. So again, think back. The first note contained a phone number, but when police attempted to contact it in November, they couldn't identify who the owner was. Now, many offenders use tactics to obscure their identities, such as burner phones, fake email addresses, VPNs, or anonymous messaging apps. Tracing these digital footprints often requires legal steps like getting subpoenas or warrants, and every one of those has to be approved by a judge and processed. It takes time. Well, it wasn't until March of 2025 when the same phone number sent a text directly to the police. Investigators were able at that point to link Bish to the threats. And then, using his IP address and email records, and again, I'm getting all this from stuff that's available online through authoritative sources, they confirmed that Bish was the sender, finally providing the digital evidence that was necessary to move forward.
All right, other news for you this morning. It is 7:05 and a man is in jail accused of threatening to kill a woman. Dylan Bish, age 19, of Coppell, Beaver County, is charged with sending the woman threatening texts and handwritten notes after she refused to go out with him. Police say one text message said he had killed 20 other women. Police say Bish told them he was obsessed with the woman and wouldn't stop until she was dead.
So now we face the legal hurdles in charging somebody like this, because even when law enforcement has a suspect, they can't simply go out and arrest someone based on suspicion alone. There are strict legal standards that must be met in order to charge and detain a suspect in a case like this. So while police had spoken to Bish after the second note in February, they still didn't have enough evidence to detain him. And man, isn't that so frustrating? But you only usually get one dip at the well on these kinds of things, so you don't want to mess up the case by moving too quickly. And that really frustrates us as citizens. But it wasn't until his confession that they had clear, undeniable proof. If in fact that admission happened the way they say it did, or confession, but they had what they needed to charge him with terroristic threats, stalking, and harassment. Now, additionally, laws regarding threats vary by jurisdiction, and I don't know Pennsylvania law that well, but the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they had enough evidence to move forward. Otherwise, Bish could have walked free, or worse, his behavior might have escalated, knowing that he now is on law enforcement's radar and he's got to hurry and make his mark if this is all about legacy. And oftentimes, when you see someone who is considered a budding serial killer, and that in this case is admitting that they've committed a bunch more that cannot be proved at this point, it's sometimes about legacy. Could you imagine living such a mundane life that doing something like this seemed to make good sense to you? It's just really difficult to consider, isn't it? Well, law enforcement coordination is the next area, because I don't think many people realize how many agencies are involved in cases like this. In this particular case, Coppell Borough PD worked with the Beaver County Sheriff's detectives and the State Police Crime Lab. Each agency has its own protocols and procedures, and they do their gathering of information their own way. And so when you start combining all these jurisdictions together, it takes time. The investigators needed to ensure that they had a case that was strong enough to hold up in court, too. So again, going back to this idea of only going to the well once, if they rushed to process this thing too quickly and they failed to secure concrete evidence, Bish could have evaded justice and still may if they come up with determinations that evidence was collected improperly. So this boils down to also the value of that suspect interview, because one of the most critical moments in this case, in my opinion, came when Bish reportedly was confronted and interviewed. And during this interrogation, he not only confessed to sending the notes and the messages, but also elaborated on his disturbing fantasies and his desire to learn how to avoid getting caught. Had the investigators not obtained this confession, the case would have boiled down to circumstantial evidence. Certainly, forensic and digital evidence provided strong links, but Bish's own words kind of sealed the case against him, if in fact it's all true. So, the question about why it took months instead of days, again, dealing with cases of stalking and serial predator fantasies, law enforcement has to move kind of carefully to ensure that justice is served. To recap, the case took time because stalking cases often involve behavior that's not immediately criminal. Number two, forensic and digital evidence requires time to process. Number three, legal procedures have to be followed to protect the integrity of the case. Number four, coordination between multiple agencies can really slow down the process. And number five, suspect confessions and behavioral assessments can play a crucial role in solidifying the charges. So when cases of stalking and violent threats unfold, again, we have this feeling of frustration because it takes so long to act. And the delays, while necessary, can make people feel vulnerable and helpless. So while we rely on the police to protect us, the truth is that we as individuals must take personal responsibility for our own safety, especially in situations where law enforcement is gathering evidence at a pace that feels way too slow. So in cases like the Dylan Bish investigation, where a predator kind of gradually escalates from unwanted attention to explicit threats of violence, law enforcement has to move cautiously. Again, arresting someone too soon without enough legal backing could allow them to walk free. And it could embolden an offender, reinforcing the belief that they somehow are smarter than the system. So, for the victims of these kinds of crimes, there's a couple of things that I think we could do to help improve our own safety. Number one, recognize the early warning signs, because most stalkers and predators don't start out with extreme behavior. They're going to test the boundaries first, like in this case, leaving notes, sending unsolicited messages, or making repeated unwanted contact. Victims need to recognize these red flags and document them immediately. Like, keep records of all of the interactions that are going on, including texts, emails, and notes. Do screenshots of digital messages in case the sender deletes them, especially if they're on a format that allows things to be deleted and be deleted from both the sender and receiver's point of view. Note dates and times of suspicious activity and pay close attention to the escalations that are occurring. If behaviors are worsening, law enforcement will take the case more seriously. Now, number two, you got to report early and consistently. Because, many victims hesitate to report early signs of stalking because they feel like law enforcement isn't going to take it seriously. Well, while a single incident might not result in immediate action, repeated reports to establish a pattern are absolutely necessary. So make sure that you file a report for each and every incident, even if it seems minor to you. Follow up with law enforcement to ensure that your case is being documented and worked on. Seek legal protection, such as restraining orders, especially if the threats are escalating and you know who's doing it. And make sure you're strengthening personal security measures because, again, police can take time getting these things done. So change your routines. If you're dealing with a stalker, they probably know your schedule. So alter your routine to avoid being predictable. Increase your home security by installing security cameras, motion activated lights, and alarm systems. And limit the amount of information that you're going to put online because many stalkers are going to gather information from social media. Keep your accounts private and avoid sharing location in real time. Don't tell people I'm here on vacation and look how nice I'm having, what a nice time I'm having. Save those for after and say, hey, just had a great time in the Grand Cayman Islands or something like that. Notify trusted people like family, friends, and coworkers of the situation so that they can help look out for signs of danger. Go out and kind of seek community support because surviving a stalking situation requires having some emotional and strategic support. So consider joining self-defense classes to build some of your confidence up. Connect with victim advocacy groups who can offer some guidance and lean on a support system because if you have trusted people involved, they can help you and keep you from being isolated. They can provide some additional safety. You know, as much as we want to believe that the police will stop every potential predator in time, the reality is just that law enforcement operates within a system of rules and legal constraints. And frankly, law enforcement is overrun with cases and not enough people to do them. No police officer wants to tell a victim to just wait and see because they know that it's possible that the stalker could escalate. But sometimes the law simply doesn't allow for an immediate arrest. And while it might seem frustratingly slow, this methodical approach is necessary. By rushing to an arrest too quickly, they could end up with sufficient evidence, and that could allow a dangerous individual to escape justice. Or worse, encourage them to escalate, thinking they're above the law. The arrest of Dylan Bish likely prevented a future crime, demonstrating the importance of patience and diligence in these investigations. However, that doesn't mean that victims should sit passively and wait. Taking personal responsibility for one's safety by staying vigilant, by strengthening your security, by seeking support, all of these can make a difference between becoming a statistic and surviving a dangerous situation. I personally think law enforcement works hard to stop dangerous criminals, but in the crucial time between first red flags and an arrest, your own actions might be your first line of defense. Hey, I want to know what your comments are on this one and what your thoughts are. So I hope you'll put them down below. And I hope you're looking for Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and of course, Twitter. You can't pass up the X, can you? And please, if you like audio podcasts, check out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like true crime, folks, check out my books on profilingevil.com, or you can get them through Amazon. But if you want a signed copy that I'll deliver anywhere in the United States for free, go to Profiling Evil and check us out. And by the way, while you're there, sign up for our digital newsletter, the BOLO. It stands for Be on the Lookout. And the only way you're going to get it is by signing up at profilingevil.com. Hey, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.